intervened in multiple free elections and coordinated the overthrow of democratically elected officials and a government that threatened U.S. capitalist and imperialist interests. So basically this forum is giving all of us an opportunity to learn more about U.S. foreign policy and how it affects us here at home. And it's going to be broken up into 3 panels. We're going to be talking about the Middle East, then we're going to talk about Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about how war and militarism and imperialism affect us here at home. A lot of times when we discuss these things, it's, you know, how does it affect people overseas, which is important. I don't want to diminish that. That is important. We're all global citizens. We should care as much about what happens to people overseas as we do U.S. citizens. At least that's what I believe. But I think it's important that some of it gets lost in terms of what exactly does what's going on in Iraq mean for us here. Besides, you know, those of us who have loved ones in the military, having them go overseas or, you know, possibly being killed or hurt, you know. So just discuss that a little bit more and get a better understanding of how these things affect us here. So we're going to open up with a film clip from Rethinking Afghanistan. Discusses the war in Afghanistan. We'll let Anna cue that up for us. She's a retired MIT BC professor and political activist for the past 56 years. Our next panelist is Saba Abed. She's a representative and Palestinian American community of Richmond representative. And Phil Relato, editor of the Virginia Defender, board member of the Campaign Against Sanctions and Military Intervention in Iran.
Greet you in the Islamic way as well as the Arab greeting. First, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I don't think you need a translation of that. I hope I can go over some of the events in Iraq, as I was asked by Phil. And I chose to start from the day that the United States hired an authorized assassin, the revolt and the overthrow of the monarchy, which was, of course, a British-American favorite. So they tried to assassinate the leader of the revolution, who is now, after the overthrow of the Ba'ath regime, Abdul Karim Qasim was a real nationalist, and the overthrow or the murder of Abdul Karim Qasim did not take place with Saddam succeeding in assassinating him. He had to run away to Egypt. Anyway, going from there, I would like to mention the coming to power of Saddam Hussein as the actual leader of the revolt, but as a matter of prestige, he used General Ahmed Hassan Zakr. Anyway, this went on until I believe 1978. In 1978-79, I don't remember, Saddam really took over leadership of the country from Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, and Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr had to run away. Nevertheless, the belief is that he sent assassins to kill him in the United Arab Emirates. Now, this coincided with the revolution in Iran, of the Islamic Republic of Iran, with the overthrow of the friend of Israel and the United States, the Shah. This overthrow, of course, did not jive with the liking of the Western powers, and particularly Israel, because the first thing that Khomeini declared is closing the Israeli embassy in Tehran and inviting the late Yasser Arafat to give him as a gift the embassy to be established as a Palestinian embassy. Also, the taking over of the American embassy with the 51 hostages, I believe, that were kept there. And this, of course, was a big defiance of the United States. So, in retaliation, the United States, of course, declared its siege, its freezing of the assets of Iran, and most prominently the freezing of $20 billion at that time that the Shah had ordered planes and arms. So, and until today, this money has not been returned to Iran. With then also the United States encouraged Saddam to invade Iran, which was, of course, at that time, with not much arms or planes that it could defend itself. Nevertheless, they defended the country bravely. But despite the fact that against the Iranians, and then, of course, the same things were used against the Shiites uprising, what is called in Arabic الثورة الشعبانية. Use it against the Shiites in the south and the Kurds in the north. Many of you probably have heard of the chemical bombing of Halabja, the Kurdish village in the north of Iraq, as well as the actually massacre of 182 thousand what are called the failed Kurds, because these failed Kurds, unlike the majority of the Kurds, are Shiites. So we have a situation where people were dying from being directly directly killed, or as a result of, later on I'm going to jump into the part that where the Iraq was
Greeting Dr. Hussein, great to be with you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To me, this is the most beautiful greeting, not only because I'm a Muslim, but the fact when you wish somebody peace, peace be upon you. There is nothing more beautiful than peace, to live in peace, to have a peace of mind, and to be in a state of turmoil and war is such a horrible way to live. War brings destruction and the worrying. Now, Iraq, before it was invaded, Saddam Hussein, nobody can disagree that he was a tyrant and he was a dictator. However, some people long for the days of Saddam simply because they were safe to go to school, they were safe to have, they had electricity, they had water running. And this American invasion of Iraq was supposed to help the Iraqis, devastated. The schools are not safe, there's no electricity, there's no water, there's no health care. So war, no matter how much sometimes it is necessary, some people think it is necessary, it is very devastating. Now, I grew up in Palestine, and I lived under Israeli occupation for about 3 years before I migrated to the United States. Life there is just intolerable, and it's gotten worse. Every time I go back to visit, the situation gets worse. Because not only that people are not safe, and they cannot go, they don't feel safe, they cannot go to their farms, to their land, to farm and harvest their own land. It's a situation, I mean, oppression and injustice is a horrible thing to live with. But in addition to that, for the Palestinians, there is this threat of being uprooted and removed from their own homes and lose their own land, their own ancestors' homes and houses and farms that they have deeds that date back for hundreds of years. And yet they're always under the threat of home demolition. Their homes are being demolished, their houses taken, and Jewish immigrants and Jewish Israelis, settlers are moving into these places, replacing the Palestinians and keeping them homeless. Now, why should we care about this here in the United States? Well, my husband went, I think about 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, there was like a demonstration, they called it Around Jerusalem, where people, peace activists from all over the world, converged on Jerusalem, and they created a human band where people held hands to surround the city of Jerusalem. And they were kind of moving, just kind of moving around to circle the city. An American reporter noticed the Israeli soldiers were looking at my husband because he had the scarf of the Palestinian flag. So he came and warned him. He said, they're looking at you, be careful. As soon as you're out of the view of the camera, they're going to get you. He says, well, I'm here to peaceful demonstration, and they're going to do what they have to do, and I'm going to have to do what I have to do. So as soon as he got out of the view of the camera, they picked him up, and he was trying to invoke, like, I'm an American, because we send billions of dollars for Israel. $6 billion each year we send for Israel. So he said, I'm an American. He says, you're an American? Phew, what American? And he goes, Yeah, we deserve that because we sent you over billions of dollars. And man, they got so angry. They started beating him up, kicking him in the bones and we have his jacket still, it's torn, and they beat him up, they took him and kept him overnight. They would not allow the American consulate to contact him. We came and to check on him, and they just would not allow him. And he says, I can't believe you. To the counselor after he left him, he says, how can you allow this? I mean, you send them so much money, so much aid and so on, and you have no pull whatsoever. The reason the United States has no power over Israel is because they are very powerful, very strong lobby here in the United States, where Israel's interest comes before American interest. And these politicians, all they care about is political contribution, staying in office, almost as bad as these corrupt leaders who just want to hold on to power forever and ever. So, in Israel, like I said, they get $6 billion of aid every year, and they are the highest recipients of American aid in the world. They take more than half of all the aid that America sends all over the world. So, what does that mean? Israeli citizens, each and every one of them, are entitled to complete health care, social security. They have so much more protection from our tax money than we do. We don't have enough money to pay for the programs that takes care of our people here. Health care, look how much they're fighting it. Obama pushed it a little bit, and they're trying to repeal that. So that's why it matters. What happens in Palestine matters to it because it's our money, our taxes. In addition to that, when there is injustice and there is oppression, there is anger, there is fighting, people are going to resist the injustice. So when the Palestinians are mistreated continuously and with full view of the world, and everybody's looking away, kind of shy, don't want to say anything, nobody wants to offend Israel, they violate all the international laws regarding human rights. They arrest without any, they can keep people in jail for as long as they want without any accusation. They have stolen so many organs. They kill these young Palestinian children and young men and women who are throwing stones at the soldiers with the tanks and so on to try to resist compensating their land, taking their land. They kill them and then they take them and refuse to give them to their families, and they steal their organs and they sell them. And there was a ring that was caught in Washington, in New York, where this rabbi was caught with selling organs. And this, like, Israel is the biggest supplier of human organs. So imagine, add insult to injury. They kill you and they make money off of your organs, and they take your land and so on. And they get away with all these murders and all these crimes because they have very strong lobby here, and no one can question what Israel does with the money. So again, it's our money, and the anger and the frustration and the injustice leads to anger, it leads to violence. In some people's minds, they decided, well, we can't fight Israel because Israel is protected. It's like the bully who's being protected with somebody who is in power, the principal of the school. He's the son of, he can do whatever he wants. So Israel can do whatever it wants because of the protection of the United States. And in some people's twisted mind, they've decided in order to really fight for Palestinians' rights, we have to go to the source and attack America. And that's why September 11 happened. Because of so much injustice and so much ignoring of the Palestinians' needs and their human rights and so on, some people felt like they had to attack America. That's why it matters to Americans what happens in the world. This thing is going to spill over eventually to the United States, and it did. And look where it got us now. We got into a war with Afghanistan, a war that's almost impossible to win because these people cannot, it's a different war. These people's mentality is different. They fight in a different way. Low tech. We have high tech, but they have low tech. Again, we got dragged into Iraq. Iraq, we had no business going into. I mean, they could have gotten rid of Saddam very easily if they wanted to. They have assassinated people many times in the past, and they could have gotten rid of him very easily. But they didn't, and they wanted to go to the war. War is profitable to some people. Who made the money? Dick Cheney, Bush, Halliburton. Exactly. And who paid for the price with their blood? It's the poor people, young people who have no future and nothing. Look at these boots. I mean, it breaks your heart. All these young people go and die so somebody can line their pockets. And these veterans, when they finish fighting, they can't even find. Some of them are homeless. They don't get the care when they are injured. They don't get the medical care they need. So that's why peace is very important to us, and it touches us personally here. It doesn't just affect overseas, it affects all of us.
I'm supposed to talk about Libya and Iran in 5 minutes. One of the things we really wanted to get across with this forum today is how much money really goes for war from our tax dollars, and what that money could do here in this country if it was kept here, not to mention help other people around the world. So I want to cut into my Libya and Iran time just a smidge to point out that we're told that the defense budget takes up what they call the defense budget. You know, it used to be called the Department of War, and then they changed it to Department of Defense. Sugar, yeah. And they tell us it takes up about 25 cents of every federal tax dollar. Do you know that nuclear weapons do not come under the Department of Defense? That's the Department of Energy. Nuclear weapons are not counted as part of the defense budget. They're counted under the Department of Energy. The Veterans Affairs is a separate issue. ROTC is a separate issue. So many things that go to support the military are not counted as military from the military budget, including the money to pay for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's a separate appropriation, separate from the military budget. And then almost as great as that 25% that they say is the military budget is the money that is spent to pay for the interest on the national debt, the vast majority of which was money borrowed to support wars. So the War Resisters League, which has been around for about 90 years now, estimates that about half of every federal dollar actually goes to the military or military-related activities. Now, way back in about 1911, 1912, a guy named Winston Churchill was made head of the Navy in England, United Kingdom. And one of the things he did was he changed the British Navy over from coal-operated ships to oil-operated ships. This was the first time that it had been done. People were aware that oil was in the world and it could be, a useful resource, but it was not considered the kind of fabulously wealthy resource it is today. But once he changed over the British Navy to an oil-fueled Navy, they found out that it was much faster and more efficient and far more powerful than any of the other navies in the world. And then, of course, England was the first industrial country, and industry depends on oil to function. Once they moved away from coal-fueled steam engines and water-fueled steam engines, they went to go to oil, they could grow exponentially. So oil became the most valuable quantity in the world. And 2/3 of the world's known oil resources are in the Middle East, which is why half of all U.S. foreign aid is given to, number one, Israel, the biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid. And when I say foreign aid, I don't mean giving it to the people, I mean giving it to the government so they can maintain control. Over $3 billion a year to Israel, and the second largest amount has been given to Egypt to support Hosni Mubarak. Now, Washington is claiming that they're so glad that this terrible dictator is gone and they want to join the Egyptian people to create democracy and so on. But they supported this guy for 30 years. And it was the second largest recipient. Why? Because Egypt was the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel. So that was their strategy. Israel is the land-based military base for the United States in the Middle East, and Egypt was the closest ally. So all this money is pouring into it. The Sixth Fleet out of Norfolk in and out and in and out of the Mediterranean and the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, and all of that burning oil. The Fifth Fleet out of Bahrain, U.S. forces stationed in virtually every Arab country in the region. $1 trillion spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan alone since 2001. $1 trillion. $30 billion from Virginia taxpayers. In Wisconsin, $18 billion, which is 4 times the state budget deficit that Governor Scott Walker says the reasons why he's trying to break the unions in Wisconsin, are the money that should be here for jobs, education, housing, healthcare, is being spent to further the profits of U.S. oil companies and related companies like Halliburton and Brown and Root and so on, all over the world. Now, Dr. Saini, fortunately for me, already went over some of the history of Iran, so I don't have to go there, except to say that Iran is one country that I do know something about. I also have to speak on North Korea, Cuba, and Libya later. But Iran is a country that I've been to several times, that I've spent 4 or 5 years now studying, and I know that virtually every single charge made against Iran is a lie. And if you want to pick up a copy of the book, In Defense of Iran, Notes from a U.S. Peace Delegation's Journey to the Islamic Republic, normally $15, we're making it available here for $10, and all proceeds go to support our all-volunteer newspaper. Libya. I'm just going to finish up with Libya because Libya is in the news now. You know that the United Nations just passed a resolution that authorizes the setting up of a so-called no-fly zone in Libya. And there's a phony meeting of Arab states and European states meeting in Europe to figure out how to carry this out practically. And Washington is saying, oh, we're going to help a little bit here and there, but we're not going to take charge. We're not going to be the one. No troops on the ground and so on. Not one of these countries can operate without the United States approval and go ahead. Gaddafi is not the same as Hosni Mubarak. He's not the same as the king of Tunisia. He's not the same as the monarchy of Bahrain. He has a long history of standing up to the United States. Erratically, not consistently, back and forth, with compromises, but he's not someone they want to see stay in power. And so they have long relationships with the opposition opposing Gaddafi, and we need to be very, very skeptical of what's going on today. The rule of thumb is, if Washington supports a democracy movement, be careful. Be very careful. And if they demonize a government overseas, be very careful. They can't demonize someone like Fidel Castro and then use the same words against someone else and have that same person be a dictator, a brutal, authoritarian tyrant. It doesn't work that way. So I'm not going to pretend I know all about Libya, but I know how much they lied about Iran. And so I'm not going to get taken in by the next time they tell me who my new enemy is. So finish there, but please stay for the whole program today. It gets better and better.
I'm the director of the Richmond Peace Education Center, and thank you to the defenders for organizing this, for, as always, directing our attention to the most important questions, and for grounding us all in a very important analysis for our work. Phil asked me to talk a little bit about this display, which is the Eyes Wide Open Virginia exhibit. And it's an exhibit focused on Afghanistan and the human and economic cost to the Commonwealth of Virginia of the war in Afghanistan. This is actually just half of our larger exhibit. We actually have a larger exhibit that includes both combat boots representing Virginians who've lost their lives in Afghanistan, as well as Virginians who've lost their lives in the Iraq conflict. That exhibit is much, much bigger and would have actually been too large to have here, although it will be hosted in Charlottesville in the end of May, and it's actually worth a trip out there to see it. It's a very powerful, powerful display. So this is an exhibit that we coordinate statewide together with Richmond Friends Meeting, which is the Quaker Church in Richmond, and it's designed to promote critical reflection and engagement in the human cost of these conflicts, because we all know that unless you have a loved one who's in the military or know somebody on the ground in one of these countries, you can all just basically go about our lives. ignoring and forgetting about the fact that we as a nation are engaged in these very deadly conflicts and very costly conflicts, and their human costs. So the Afghanistan display includes 43 pairs of combat boots. Each boot is tagged with the name, age, and hometown of an individual service member who's been killed in Afghanistan. And it also includes civilian shoes representing a tiny, tiny fraction of the Afghan civilians who have been killed. And those civilian shoes are also tagged with the names and ages of Afghan civilians who have lost their lives. When we held the Iraq version of the display back a few years ago at VCU, and it took up most of the kind of red brick plaza outside the student commons at VCU, we actually, as a way of kind of acknowledging how symbolic and how almost insufficient the civilian shoes really are, we actually came up with a calculation of how huge the display would have to be if you actually had a real pair of shoes representing every single Iraqi who had died. And we actually calculated that if you had an actual number of shoes representing Iraqi civilians who'd been killed, and you put them heel to toe, that row of shoes would have actually stretched from VCU to Charlottesville. It's a lot, yes. Again, this display is just one of the programs that we run at the Peace Center. It's been held at many, many, many places across the state. And we just recently unveiled this Iraq version of the display. The Iraqi version of the display also has memorabilia on many of the boots. So often when we host this display in a city, we will actually alert military families whose sons and daughters and loved ones are represented here, and we actually invite them to attend and to observe the boots and to place memorabilia on their loved ones' boots. So on the Iraq version of the display, we have little notes and pictures, and one is a little note from a 5-year-old saying, "Daddy, I miss you," and it's really heart-rending. And we place the boots out kind of in a grid fashion with enough space so that people can walk in between and really sit with the boots and engage with them. And it's, you know, I was telling Anna a second ago, I sort of as a peace activist, I don't see this display as a substitute for the kind of direct action and direct political organizing work that is really required to stop these wars, but I really see it as an important complement to those other strategies, in part because this kind of a display has the ability to cross over and to reach beyond the folks that are necessarily going to come out to our peace protests. And we've found that in every city where we've held it, there's been really incredible press coverage. So we almost always have seen a front page or a front page of a local section news article actually focused on the human and economic cost of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq to the Commonwealth of Virginia. And it's hard to get past those editorial room censors who aren't interested in promoting that perspective. And we found that this particular exhibit has a way of kind of crossing over and generating that kind of attention. So that's what this is.
These combat boots are of Virginia.
These are combat boots of Virginians, and these are symbolic. These are not actually the boots that were worn, but these are combat boots representing Virginians who have been killed in Afghanistan. That is correct. And just say one or two more words about that. I actually have the list with the names and more detail about the individuals if anyone's interested in looking. But basically, if you read over the list, the ages really jump out at you because most of these guys are kids. A couple of them are 19 years old. Most of them are in their early 20s. Some are in mid-20s and 30s. But these are young kids, and they're coming from all across the state. And they have been killed since 2001 over there. I also want to just last kind of comment, as part of our work drawing attention to and educating about Afghanistan, we have scheduled what will I think be a very powerful event on April 14th, and that's a Thursday, and I just wanted to put a little plug in for that. We've invited a peace activist, Kathy Kelly, to come to Richmond that Thursday night, April 14th. The event will be held at Fifth Baptist Church on Cary Street. It's 1415 West Cary. It'll start at 7 p.m. It's totally free. And she's one of the only peace activists who's been to Afghanistan, has spent a considerable amount of time in Afghanistan over the past year. So she's actually been there 4 times. She's been there 3 times. She's there now. She will be just returning to the States on April 10th and then reporting back to us here in Richmond about her observations and her perspectives on April 14th. And one thing that so fresh back from Afghanistan, and she talks a lot, and when she presents about just her observations from the ground in Afghanistan. Part of her message that she really drives home is just the sort of almost unimaginable poverty of Afghanistan, and we almost can't comprehend it, but the life expectancy there is like 44 years old, and something like 1 in 4 children die before age 5, 60% of children are malnourished. So she really holds up her observations about life on the ground in Afghanistan, the impact on civilians of the US war, and she's done a lot of work there with a particular group of young people, teenagers and people in their early 20s who are working to promote nonviolent alternatives to military intervention in Afghanistan and working to build bridges among groups of young people within Afghanistan. So please, I invite you all to come April 14th for that. Thank you so much.
The Walk team